the Red Cross has confirmed that more than 100 men, women and children who were evacuated from Mariupol in the past couple of days have now arrived in the town of Zaporizhzhia. You're just looking at some live pictures there. A Red Cross spokesperson said that the evacuees are now receiving initial humanitarian assistance, including health and psychological care. We understand that these are some of the people who were in the Azovstal steel plant, where we know that they endured 2 months of trauma, living in absolute hell underground, where they faced extreme lack of water, food and sanitation, and were experiencing unrelenting heavy shelling. In fact, this has been the story of Mariupol for the last 2 months since the war has begun. People have been living in some of the most dire circumstances. They've talked about corpses in the streets, lack of food, water and sanitation as they endured bombing and heavy shelling, heavy Russian shelling that was relentless. And some of these people have arrived safely in Zaporizhzhia. There have been multiple attempts to get them out safely over the last 2 months by the International Committee of the Red Cross, by the UN, and now this is some of the people who have managed to come out of there alive. We did see images yesterday of a 6-month-old who was among the many people, over 100 who have made it out alive, and the Red Cross has said today that seeing a 6-month-old playing with a straw of grass, his delighted mother said that it was the first time that he has done so. So that baby alongside many other children living in utter darkness there. Let's get the very latest now from our correspondent, Joe Inwood.
The ceasefire did not last long. Once the first 100 civilians had escaped the steelworks, Russia resumed its attacks. It's thought more than 200 people are still trapped under the huge Azovstal complex, while around 100,000 more are stuck in the city itself. Many of them unwilling or unable to flee.
Half of the city is destroyed. Where can I go? You wake up in the morning and you cry. You cry in the evening. I don't know where to go at all.
The Russians are now in charge of the rest of this once vibrant port city. They're trying to show the world that they are helping the people here, despite the devastation they have wrought. The Russian-backed separatist rebels claim Mariupol will be rebuilt.
With the support of the Russian Federation, a very serious, huge construction project is planned, which we will be able to see in the very near future. But it will begin as soon as the issue with Azovstal and nationalists is fully completed.
Russia now controls large sections of eastern and southern Ukraine. This is the city of Mariupol. But even on an organised press trip, people are willing to speak out. This woman starts complaining about the destruction before being shouted down by her neighbours. The US is warning there is a real danger Russia will hold what they call fake referendums to annex Ukrainian territory, as they did in Crimea in 2014.
According to the most recent reports, we believe that Russia will try to annex the Donetsk People's Republic and Luhansk People's Republic, in quotes, so-called, to Russia.
If Ukraine is to prevent the loss of large swathes of its land, it will need Western help to keep flowing. Today, Prime Minister Boris Johnson addressed the Ukrainian parliament, echoing the words of Winston Churchill and promising more high-tech support.
You've written one of the most glorious chapters in military history and in the life of your country. The so-called irresistible force of Putin's war machine has broken on the immovable object of Ukrainian patriotism and love of country. This is Ukraine's finest hour.
And this is why Ukraine says it will keep fighting. A 14-year-old boy reportedly died when a Russian missile struck this building near Odessa. A dormitory, according to President Zelensky. What threat was he to Russia? Joe Inwood, BBC News, Lviv.
And Joe joins us now live from Lviv. And Joe, as we speak, those buses have just arrived in Zaporizhzhia from Mariupol. We've been waiting really for the last couple of days, and finally they're there.
Yeah, absolutely. We understand from my colleague Laura Bicker that 156 people have arrived on the bus. Now, that is more than we'd expected. We don't know for certain. Have all of them come from Azovstal? I guess there are two options here. Either more people came out than we realised and were told. That is possible because the United Nations have been keeping quiet on exactly what was going on here, trying to avoid producing too much of a running commentary. Or alternatively, some other people have joined the convoy, but certainly a large number of people are now in Zaporizhzhia. As you say, it took a little longer than we'd expected, but maybe we shouldn't have been surprised by that. Just a few weeks ago, I was doing the same thing, waiting for people in that reception centre, the very one where Laura and our colleagues are now, waiting for people to come. And we were told they'd be there in the day, and they were in fact 24 hours later, because it's a long journey, there's lots of checkpoints, and even with the assistance of the Red Cross and the United Nations, it's not an easy journey.
No, not at all, Joe. An incredibly risky journey, given what they've endured and the sort of 2 months of horror that they've been through without any food, water, sanitation, to finally make it out of there. There was this sort of desperate attempt to make sure that they got to Zaporizhzhia as safe as possible.
Yeah, I mean, it's impossible to imagine what they've been through, especially the children. The idea of going through all of that time with, limited access to food and water, the continuous trauma of the shelling, of the fighting, of the violence, and also not seeing sunlight for all that time. It must be an incredibly traumatic experience. And now, of course, they go through this process, the long journey, the checkpoints. It's going to be traumatic again. We hope, we assume, now they're in Zaporizhzhia, that they will get some safety, some security, and some assistance as well, and they can find a way of maybe having a bit of a rest. Although, of course, there are, as we've seen, and we're part of this, the world's media are there. There is a huge amount of attention, of international attention on this, because the story of Mariupol, and specifically of the Azovstal steelworks, has been a huge one. It's one that's really come to characterise a lot of people's understanding of this conflict.
Indeed, very much so. And we mustn't forget, though, that there are over 100,000 people that remain stuck in Mariupol, in that besieged city. And they continue to experience shelling and bombing. And, of course, several hundred still stuck in the Azovstal steel plant.
Yeah, absolutely. I think probably now the 100,000 figure, the figures around this are quite difficult, because that figure, I believe, comes from the mayor of Mariupol, who I think is living now in exile in Ukrainian territory, forgive me. And of course the Russians would say that there are people there that have stayed, probably that have welcomed them, and there's footage certainly that the Russians have released, and the Russians have allowed journalists to film. They do control what journalists can do quite significantly. They don't, for example, I believe, allow the BBC to go there. They say that some people are staying voluntarily, but certainly there are a lot of people there who are not able to leave. They don't know where they would be able to go, and they don't think it would be safe. The figure we have is a couple of thousand people who are currently waiting in a town trying to get evacuation nearby Mariupol. But yes, as you say, very, very difficult conditions. The people still in the steelworks, well, that is another situation entirely. They are still living in those appalling conditions. Food is running out, water is in very short supply. And as I say, seen no daylight. And as we saw this weekend, the shelling, the rockets, the bombardments, that all seem to have started up again.
Joe, thank you so much for bringing us up to date there from the western city of Ukraine.